Before viewing video lessons, it is important to read the textbook using the learning guide as your turn-by-turn directions. Then use the learning guide to take organized notes in your own words with examples and pictures. This video continues Human Memory Chapter 7. So far, we've talked about a model for memory in which sensory input moves onto the sensory memory store, where, if we pay attention to it, it moves into short-term memory. While in short-term memory, if we work on it, do something with it, it has the chance to make it to long-term memory, where it can later be retrieved. So we last talked about working memory, and we talked about what we do with information in working memory if it is encoded well enough, makes it to long-term memory. So we need to talk a little bit more about encoding and ways that it can happen that create the most effective types of memory code. So one way of looking at this is through different levels of processing. So let's say you have a new term you have to learn in your psychology class. So you can process that term at a very shallow level, which is just the structure of what you see. So that could be things like, how is the word spelled? You could process it at a slightly deeper level called phonetic encoding that emphasizes what a word sounds like. So it could be something like, how do I pronounce that word? Or what other kinds of words does this rhyme with? So let's say this is a really important term that you need to learn in this psychology class. To structurally encode that term, I would focus on the letters and how it was spelled. Z, R, T, G, A, B. I could write those down in my notes. I could write them over and over again and rehearse them until I knew how to spell this word properly. But I could also take that coding slightly deeper to a phonetic level. If I did phonetic encoding, I would emphasize what the word sounded like. Z, t, g, e, b. Zertagab, zertagab, zertagab. Okay, zertagab, that's how I say that. So as you can probably tell, structural and phonetic encoding aren't going to be terribly helpful for creating a good retrievable memory of this very important word in your psychology class, because you're not going to be tested on your ability to spell it or to say it. So for the stuff you learn in this class and most of your classes, you're going to have to take your level of processing down to the deep level of processing, which is called semantic encoding. Semantic encoding is going to emphasize the meaning of that word. So you may look up the textbook definition, or look at how it's written about in the textbook and used in different sentences to try to figure out, what does this word mean? So you're going to take this new, very important term, and you're going to look it up in the textbook. What the heck is zertagab, right? I'm going to look it up, because on the test, I'm most likely to need to know what it means, not how it's necessarily spelled or how it sounds. That would be semantic encoding. Now, semantic encoding is the deepest of those three different types of processing, but sometimes it's not quite enough all by itself. And so there's actually a way to create an even stronger, more effective memory code than just simply looking up the definition of the word. So we can actually do something called enriching the encoding. The main way we do this is through something called elaboration. Elaboration is when you link the stimulus, in this case our new psychology term, to other meaningful information at the time of encoding. So, besides just looking up the definition in the textbook, I could take that semantic encoding to an enriched or even deeper level by defining it in my own words. My own words have much greater meaning to me than the textbook author's words or my psychology instructor's words. So by defining this in my own words, I'm going to be able to take that encoding to a deeper, even more enriched level, which creates a more effective retrievable memory, i.e., I'm going to have a better time on the test. Now, some other things that I can use to elaborate or link are going to be examples. Now, the book is going to give you examples, I'm going to give you examples, but your examples are going to work the best because your examples are more meaningful to you than mine or the textbooks. You can also enrich that encoding through something called dual coding or visual imagery. This is when you're going to combine the words and the meaning of those words with images that are meaningful. You can't always create a meaningful image for everything you learn in college coursework, but sometimes you can. And for example, you can create a visual or an image to help you understand what deep, enriched semantic encoding means or looks like. So here's an example. Here's our term. We've really got to remember this term. We've got to focus on what it is. So we're going to figure out how to spell it. That's structural. Figure out maybe how to try to pronounce it. Ugh. That's the phonetic encoding. And then most students are going to say, I got to figure out what this is, and they're going to look up that textbook definition. The problem with just doing that and not doing any of the rest of it is sometimes those textbook definitions are no more helpful than the weird word themselves. So think about how many times in a college class or in any part of your life you've come across a new word or term and you've looked up the definition and thought, gobbledygook means blah, 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 blah. Ugh, none of that means anything to me. So if you're finding that's happening, one of the things you're going to need to do is take that definition and find your own words to make sense of it. Find words that mean something to you. Try looking at how your instructor or your classmate has defined that term. And link that term to meaningful examples and pictures when possible. So as you can see, this is both a way to help explain and give meaning to what deep enriched semantic encoding is. It's an example of it, and it's a visual. So before we leave this topic, I want you to do a little exercise that I do in the classroom when I'm meeting with students. And that is to do the deepest, most enriched encoding of what encoding is. So in my class, I ask students on a note card to do some semantic processing, and we're going to do enriched semantic by defining what encoding, that's the real very important word you need to learn in psychology, in your own words. So right now in your notes, What is encoding? What does it mean personally to you? Pause the video until you get that done. Now, I want you to use an elaboration technique to make it even more enriched by coming up with your own example. So, what's a good example that you could use to help your friend, your spouse, your parent figure out what encoding is? Pause the video till you're done. And finally, create a picture to help you understand what encoding is. If you've done those things, you now have created the strongest, most retrievable memory code you could possibly have created for what the word encoding means. That means on test day, any test questions that have anything to do with encoding, you're going to have the easiest time finding that information because you've created the deepest possible code. Now, before we leave this topic, I do need to talk about the role of motivation in influencing working memory and this encoding process. So there's a concept called motivation to remember at the time of encoding. So basically, at the time you're trying to learn something, if you feel motivated to remember it, you're going to create a better code. Think about the classes that you've taken that you could have cared less about. Oh, this is so boring. This is so stupid. Why do I have to learn this? If you have that lack of motivation, you're going to struggle to pay attention. You're going to struggle to put forth that effort needed to form great memories. You're not going to form a good, organized, easily retrievable memory, and you're going to struggle on test day. Now think about those classes that you've taken that you have found fascinating, that you have been excited about, that you've said, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever. In those classes, you didn't have to struggle to focus your attention. It was easy. You didn't have to struggle to put forth the effort to think of the definition in your own words and think of examples and pictures. You had fun doing it. That created a strong, retrievable, organized memory code, which meant on test day, you did fantastic. Now, your instructors know that motivation affects your memory and your learning. And so sometimes they do little tricks to try to help to motivate you. One trick is sometimes we say things like, "This is important." Sometimes that's not enough. So we do things like, "This will be on the test." We bring out a marching band. We provide incentives, little quizzes along the way, feedback along the way to help to motivate you. That's how important motivation is. So at this point, we have covered the importance of doing something with memory when it's in working memory to encode it well, which is what actually creates a retrievable memory code that's stored in long-term memory that hopefully we will be able to retrieve. If we don't do this hard work, though, if we don't focus our attention, if we don't engage in effective encoding, it's going to fall out before it gets to this point. That's a second form of pseudo-forgetting. But hopefully, we've created a good memory code.